Took me longer to get out here than I thought it would. I'm glad you're with us today. If you're online, Unfiltered Radio, podcasting, so glad you're with us. So we're starting a brand new series, as Nicole just said. Here's the thing. I got this advice years ago, and this is just true advice. If you speak out of your weaknesses, you will never run out of material on a Sunday. And so that's how I plan series. And honestly, as I was thinking about this one, because I usually work a couple months in advance, I was kind of like, I don't know if I even want to talk about this. It is so uncomfortable. And all of us wrestle with it. So what I want to do over the next couple weeks, I have a very kind of specific and somewhat narrow focus. I want to deal with a temptation that is really in a lot of ways specific to people who are Christians or claim to be followers of Jesus. But the thing is, if you're not, you're joining us online or you're physically in the house today at one of our services, this is a great series for you to be here, and you'll have one of two reactions. Number one, if you're here this week and maybe one or two of the others, your reaction may be, I'm glad I'm not a Christian because I don't want to do any of that. So this will be clarifying for you. The other reaction might be clarifying in the sense of, this is why I walked away from faith, and these are some of the things that I've struggled with, because if this is what the Jesus movement and the way of Jesus is supposed to look like, then I haven't seen it done right, so I don't know if I embrace any of it. So I'm so glad you're here, and a lot of what we're going to talk about is relevant to both groups. In fact, the temptation that I'm going to discuss at some level might make some sense of the disappointment that you felt in certain seasons of your life. And maybe you're not there right now and everything's, the trend lines are up and to the right, but those moments where there's just something in your life, you just feel disappointed, it might make sense at a general level of some of the discontentment that you felt. And I mean, just most human beings have been there at least in some season of, I've got some things and some great stuff has happened, but I just feel discontent with where I am or where I'm not. It also may make sense of the feelings that some of us have of never being enough. And what's weird is you've arrived at a season that in a previous season, you're like, man, if I just got there, if I could just get to that promotion, if I could just get my kids to this point, I would just feel pretty good about life. And then you got there and you still feel like it's not enough or you're not enough. Or then the other one, it may make sense, this temptation of the feeling of if only. If only this had been different, if only I had done this different, if only things had worked out in a different kind of way. And the problem with if only is it's haunting. In fact, the if only conversations in your mind a lot of times leave you isolated and leave you feeling alone. But this is just kind of the human experience. And I think all of us have felt one or two or four of those things at some point along the way. And so this series might make sense of some of that, and specifically this temptation. So this comes from this moment where Jesus is tempted, and he is faced with this specific temptation in the midst of three other temptations where he is led away and tempted by Satan. And right there, some of you are like, well, I'm out if you're going to start talking about Satan, because I thought you were smart and maybe educated, and that's where there's just a dividing line that's crazy. So I get all of that to talk about a evil force or a Satan or a devil or an enemy. That's crazy. I'm just going to acknowledge what you think. So here's my encouragement to you. You look around the world and there are certain things, and I don't even know you, but there are certain things you look at and go, I don't think the world should be that way. I don't think humanity should be that way. How could people do that? How could they treat each other that way? How could that kind of evil exist across the world? I mean, heck, sometimes you stare up at the ceiling and you're like, how could I do that to me? And so this is Scripture's explanation for that thing that I think is in all of us of something is broken about the world and about humanity. So here's what I would say. As best you can, I'm not asking you to be intellectually dishonest, but if you could suspend all of your suspicion, if you're in the, are you serious, a devil camp, if you could suspend that for just a little while, I don't want you to miss the power of this narrative, and regardless of what you think about the rest, what it reveals about what you feel. And the fact that the Scripture is this good at unearthing what is inside of you, you should just think about that. And the power that this narrative has in terms of explaining something about our life, and specifically over the next couple weeks. So the whole narrative with that qualifier picks up where God leads Jesus away to be tempted. And maybe some of you know the story, but even if you don't, you'll track with me. And Jesus is led into a prime spot where basically temptation is at its worst and we basically are capable of anything. Jesus is led away to an isolated place. He's alone, he's exhausted, he's hungry. And come on, for any of us, I don't care how amazing you are, you put that context together, you are capable of just about anything. I mean, you send my kids away by themselves unsupervised without enough snacks and little sleep, they'll murder somebody. They are full on capable of that. It's just a prime recipe for disaster. And so there Jesus is alone, exhausted, physically depleted. And in the third temptation, it kind of reveals something, and it's something that specifically Jesus followers are tempted with over and over and over again, but it is so subtle we don't even see it. We don't even recognize it. It doesn't even feel like a temptation. So here's what the text says. Luke records it in Luke 4:5. The devil, to suspend judgment for a minute, led him to a high place and showed him in an instant all of the kingdoms of the world. Basically, most likely they're on this kind of mountainside overlooking Jerusalem at night so they can kind of see everything. And he says to Jesus, hey, check it out. Take a look of everything that's in front of you. Like, just take a good look at all of this, all of the kingdoms basically of this world. To put it at kind of our everyday life, this is the equivalent of like if you're a car person walking into the showroom at night and there's your dream car and all the lights are hitting it perfectly and you realize how much your car sucks because there it is. Or this is if anybody's taken home tours and you walk through a home tour and immediately, I mean, you weren't even dissatisfied before, but it's like the tour of discontentment. All of the appliances talk to each other and you can talk to them from Mars and like it's all got all the stuff that you don't like. You go home and suddenly you realize all the things you don't have, you're ducking because you're like, our ceiling's lower. I mean, it's just, you know what I'm talking about? It's all of that. My wife, I'll just call her out, but she's fine with it. Amazon Marketplace is our big thing. Like we will find stuff, she will find stuff on there we weren't even looking at, but it is such a good deal that some random F-150 will show up on my doorstep and I have to ask the person, did we buy this? Because I had no idea. In our most recent thing, this is a little off topic, was this is a long story. We got 2 ducks, just 2. Ducks aren't that big. And I go to the door, none of this was told to me. And again, random family, a whole family showed up at F-150 with the biggest thing in the world. And I find out, I'm asking this guy, like, did we purchase this? And it's a duck condominium. It's a duck like penthouse. Massive. We have 2 ducks, which I know the shadiness behind this. They're thinking, well, we're going to have to get 10 more just to fill this thing out. So this kind of thing happens all of the time. And so this is kind of that moment. Hey, look at this house. Look at this car. Hey, look at the duck penthouse you can buy for a great deal on Amazon Marketplace. The devil gets Jesus in this moment. He's like, check it all out. Look at all of the kingdoms of this world. Jesus, I know why you came. And I have the authority to give you this. And so Luke records that in verse 6, he says, I'll give you all the authority and all this splendor that has been given to me because during this season, in terms of the generations in the universe, I've been given rule over the earth and I can give it to anyone that I want to. Now again, just real quick before I lose you. If this is all you know, you're like, why would you say no to that? I mean, if you don't know the end of the story, why would you say no to that? I mean, wealth, power, influence, and especially if you're like, well, I mean, you could do, and this is how we always get away with stuff. Well, we could do so much good with that. There's a lot of people that you could help. I mean, and before you get, because this is the other thing we do in church a lot of times, we'll feign humility that doesn't actually exist. So just suspend your humility for a second, and let me just ask you this question to pry a little bit more. When's the last time you turned down a bonus? You're like, I don't need it. When's the last time you turned down a raise, turned down a promotion? Like, when was the last time you were confronted with a legitimately good opportunity and you're like, I just don't want that? Do you ever do that? No. And generally, you shouldn't. And so in this moment, he's like, I can give you all of this, and it doesn't even feel like a temptation. It feels like the opportunity of a lifetime. Like all of this is in front of me. There's so much good that I can do. And that's kind of the goal, right? I mean, again, in our context, that's kind of the goal. It's why you get up early. It's why you hustle. It's why you grind. It's why you get an education, try to dress halfway decent, learn some social skills. I mean, this is what you do. And you get up every day to achieve or to make progress, not because you're evil. That's how you've been wired. It's how God at some level has wired you to work and function. And yet, there's a trade-off. And this is the hinge point in this confrontation where it starts to feel a little bit more like a temptation than it does an opportunity. And Matthew actually records the same narrative, and he says this, that what happens next is Jesus says, or Satan says to him, all this I will give you. The enemy says to Jesus, if you will bow down and do what? Worship me. He's like, okay, Jesus, just one, that's all I'm asking, one time. If you'll acknowledge me, if you'll bow down to me, it's like a halfway bow. If you'll kind of bow down to me as king, just one time. That's all I'm asking. I'll give you all of this. Now, again, if you're trying to figure all this out, and we have so many people that I say every week that join us that are, I don't know about the Jesus thing, or I lost faith, or I'm trying to regain my faith, I get all that. So if you're kind of in the camp of, well, there's no devil, there's no Satan, that's weird. There's just what you see and what you get. That's life. It's what you see, it's what you get. And here's what I would tell you. If that's all there is, then you know what? Every opportunity, every chance of achievement, of success, of more, of upgrade, of more influence, at every single one of those turns and every single one of those opportunities, if all there is to life is what you see and what you get, you should take advantage of every single one of them. You shouldn't pass up a single one. It's survival of the fittest. It's get where you need to go. It's you got a little bit of time and this is all there is. That's exactly what you should do with this life. Achieve, win, gain influence, gain wealth at all costs. In fact, that's right. That's not a temptation. That's an opportunity. That's what we're after. In fact, most of us would say we're not really tempted to achieve and succeed. In fact, if people don't do that, especially in our context and where we live in the world, we're like, what's wrong with you? We're not tempted to achieve or succeed. We're tempted to be lazy. So it doesn't even make any sense. This is an opportunity. It's not a temptation. And yet many of you know what Jesus says next. And Matthew records that Jesus said to him, get away from me. Because I don't want, Jesus would say, what you're offering. Because this is so important. And this is going to set the stage for everything that Jesus is going to introduce and how it intersects with our life. But Jesus would say, I don't want what you're offering because you are offering me an opportunity to live according to the systems of this world the way everybody else lives. You are offering me the opportunity in my context to rule the way everybody else rules. To be a king like everybody else is a king, to set up a kingdom that is like every other kingdom of this world. And that is not why I came. Yeah, this looks great. This is amazing. This is what everybody else would say yes to because that's just human nature. But it's not why I came. And by the way, Satan, you can't even give me what I came for because the world has never seen what I came for. Because I'm about to introduce something brand new, a brand new way, an upside down way. So get away from me. This is not what I want. It's not why I came. And what he says next is, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Basically, Jesus is like, listen, just so you know, this is going to be helpful throughout the generations. When I came to planet Earth, I didn't come to acquire. And I didn't come to reinvent or recreate or remake anything. I came with a brand new kingdom. I came with a brand new way of life. I came with a brand new way of thinking. I came with something, can't overstate this, that the world has never seen. So what you're talking about and offering me, that's not my kind of kingdom. You know how the kingdoms of this world work? It's might makes right. It's if you gain the power and the influence, then you set the rules. That's still how the world works. And Jesus is like, that is not why I came. I did not come for a win-lose kingdom. I didn't come for an image management kingdom. I didn't come for a top-down kingdom. That is not why I came to planet Earth. And naturally, our response to that is if we're tracking with Jesus, okay, so Jesus, all due respect, I want to follow you, love you, thank you for all you've done. What's the alternative? Come on, if we're just honest, which we seldom are sometimes in church, if we're just honest, like what does that mean? Does that just mean I live a life of I don't care, I don't compete, I don't accomplish anything? That's everything you're trying to get your kids not to do, right? Do I just roll over, let whatever happen? Like Jesus, what is the alternative? And Jesus would say this, if all you see to this life is win-lose, if that's the value system in this world, just straight up, there's never any advantage to losing anything. There's never any value to losing anything. There is never any value in deferring or coming second in anything. That's how you should live this life. If the only value system you know is what you get at school, at work, the cultural idea of what it looks like to live life, then that literally you are left with one option. You strive to thrive and survive. It's survival of the fittest. It's take every opportunity, every once in a while, even if it hurts some people, you get there, you accomplish, you hit the button and say, yes, absolutely, I will. Like this is how you live life, and this is the only option. It's how you've been created. And yet Jesus would ask, but is there another option? Is there another way? And here's the thing. For some of us, this just kind of feels like it's in our DNA. I'll go first. I feel like I'm wired this way. I'm wired for, I achieve, progress, next thing. And it's actually something I've had to wrestle with for a long time. Not that that's bad in and of itself, but is that appropriate? Is it in the right context? I mean, some of you feel all of those same things. And again, they're not wrong. They're good. They're God-given. Others of you, it's not just in your DNA. It's maybe because you grew up in maybe a household or people that raised you and you saw such a lack of this in them that you went the other direction. And so Jesus would just say to you, hey, listen, all those things are God-given desires. You have been created to build and to achieve and to construct and to make better. That is the image of God in you. But this whole win-lose, top-down, image manage, win at all costs, Jesus would go, there is another way. And in fact, and people are still trying to catch up with it 2,000 years later, I modeled a different way. And it is so subtle and so countercultural that we are tempted to abandon it every single day. And everybody around you generally, and everybody in culture, and everything that is intuitive will war against this because it goes against the flow of culture, but it also, everything that Jesus taught in context of what we're talking about, it goes against the natural flow of our selfish desires. I like to get mine. I like to come in first. I like to make sure that I'm taken care of, and I am not unique. You're the same way. And all of this tends to war against all of it, and yet Jesus comes to go, I'm offering a different kind of way. There is another option, and we say this all the time around here, but it's so important. Everything that Jesus invites us into, this is really where belief and faith are most powerful. They are better for you. This is the essence of whether you're really going to follow Jesus, not salvation and do I believe Jesus died and rose again, that whole thing, which we talked about last week and is so powerful. This is just how you're going to live your life. One of the things that wars against it is just the distrust of, does God really have my best interest at heart? Does he really want what is best for me? Is his counterintuitive way, because it's not natural, is that really better? And Jesus would say, my way is better than your way. Even if it doesn't make sense, even if it wars against what's natural, following Jesus will make your life better. Following Jesus will make you better at life. It'll make you better. It'll make the people around you better. And so Jesus says, I want you to follow me. And by the way, you follow me, because this is the fear, right? I'm just going to be vulnerable. It's not going to make you less productive. I mean, sometimes the idea of if I just full on follow Jesus the way I see it in the New Testament and the uncomfortability of the Sermon on the Mount, I just feel like I'm never going to get anything done. Jesus says, no, that's not what I'm inviting you into. All the guys that wrote about this in the first century, and it was documented and preserved, and they gave their lives for it, those guys changed the world. This won't make you less productive. It'll make you better productive. This won't make you less ambitious. It'll allow you to move to a place to be appropriately ambitious within the rhythm of what God has created for your life. This won't lead you to a place to be less successful. It'll allow God to lead you to a place to provide a better definition of success that doesn't lead you to a place where you gain what you think is the whole world in your context and you lose your soul. That instead, it's deep-rooted love, joy, peace, contentment, and I've said this 100 times. Talk to people at the end of their life who are fulfilled. They are not going on and on about their retirement, 401k, or what they built. Doesn't even register. They talk about the love, joy, peace, contentment that is deep-rooted in their soul that everybody is after in life. And Jesus says, that's what I'm trying to lead you into. And so in this series, we're going to learn how do you identify when we're tempted to completely abandon the way of Jesus because it just doesn't seem natural. So Jesus' response to the devil is to offer this really helpful setup for where we're going in the series. So he says, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And this verse is actually from Deuteronomy. This is Moses preparing the people, if you know the story, where the Israelites are led out of Egyptian captivity and slavery, and he's preparing them for life in their new homeland. He basically, my paraphrase of this verse is, don't forget who you are, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget who you are, don't forget where you came from. In fact, the full context for what Jesus is quoting is this in Deuteronomy 6:12. Are you guys still with me? He says, be careful that you do not, this is Moses to the Israelites, forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. Don't forget what God has done. Don't forget where you came from. Out of the land of slavery, verse 13, fear the Lord your God and serve him only. And you know what I love? I don't know if you know the full context of this. This is that moment where maybe you've seen the movie Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egyptian captivity, and God shows up to kind of flex his muscles and show off through Moses. And in essence, my language, God out-Pharaohs Pharaoh. Most powerful man in the world. He humiliates his gods, lower G. And then he absolutely decimates his armies. But here's what's so important. This will actually help you contextualize and better understand the Old Testament. Because Jesus always, in the Old Testament, leading to ultimately, or God in the Old Testament, leading to what Jesus would do, he always accommodated to the culture to set up where he was going. So Jesus, it's as if, or God, I should say, shows up and he functions and plays according to the rules of the kingdoms of this world in order to eventually introduce a kingdom that would not be of this world, that would be inaugurated and would be eventually ushered in by Jesus. And so Jesus and God in the Old Testament reveals all of this. And so in that final temptation, Jesus is actually tempted, invited, expected to just repeat history. Do what every other God had done. Do what every other kingdom had done. Do what every other religious system had done. Like, this is the way, to quote The Mandalorian. Like, this is how it goes down. And yet Jesus, in that moment when he's tempted to embrace old ways, expected ways, win-lose ways, good, bad, Jesus says, I've come to actually launch a brand new way, a way that the world has never seen, an upside-down way, literally what is going to be known as the way of Jesus. And so Jesus refused his offer. He's like, that's not why I came. That's not what I want. You can't even give me what I want. But here's the interesting thing about it. What Jesus starts to introduce in this moment is the beginning of his ministry. It's still new. It's still untested. It's still crazy risky. And so all of Jesus' followers, as we looked at a little bit last week, they were all tempted to abandon it. All tempted to give up because it just didn't look like and feel like it worked. There was better mechanisms and leverage within culture that worked better than this way. And so they were tempted to abandon. In fact, when Jesus was arrested, do you know what the followers, what his disciples expected? They expected another Red Sea moment. Like, Jesus is going to part the Red Sea. Jesus is going to rain fire from heaven. Jesus is going to do something miraculous to show the way, because kings don't die. Kings don't give up their power. And so when Jesus was arrested, literally, the disciples were tested and tempted in the same way that Jesus was. And they viewed everything through win-lose. And so they were watching Jesus lose. And how in the world, this is why, as we looked at last week, they abandoned faith over a weekend. How in the world could somebody choose to lose? It is unnatural. We would say today, it's un-American. It's not right. Why would anybody do that? And then within the course of 48 hours, they re-engaged after the resurrection. Because in that moment, the way of law suddenly had a different perspective, and they recognized, no, because he's alive, this is a different kind of king. And obviously, he's come to set up a different kind of kingdom. And in that moment, the message began to move and launch out through the entire world. And eventually, the ecclesia, the Greek term for the church, this movement, this gathering that would dominate the globe, eventually the church, its primary symbol, just think about this for a second, would not be a sword. That was the kingdoms of this world. That's how every other god, every other kingdom were. It would not be an army-eating sea. It would be a cross. The symbol in their context of suffering and shame. And no wonder it's so uncomfortable. And Jesus would say, and this is the way of Jesus. This represented not a salvation decision, primarily. It represented a brand new way of living. Paul knew this better than anybody. Paul was, if you know him, a religious leader, tried to kill and stamp out Christianity. Then he became a Christian, was known at the time as the Way. He understood this better than anybody because he operated within a religious system that functioned according to the kingdoms of this world kind of thinking. In fact, he would literally justify violence because of this win-loss kingdoms of this world thinking. The ends justify the means. It's good, it's bad, there's no in between. That's how Paul functioned. And in that environment, when Paul showed up in the first century, the message of the Way or Christianity was seen as a threat to the religious system. And so it needed to be eliminated. And so all good, believing, God-fearing people were going to eliminate this movement. And so Paul's like, well, I'll do it. I'll sign up. And he becomes the leader. and trying to stamp out this new Christian movement, the way. And he volunteers, and this is so interesting. Paul volunteers and feels complete freedom and no contradiction in conscience to be able to go and arrest and to try and to execute Jewish people, thinking that violence was God's will and that his violence was God's work. And so Paul would go, I get it. I get where this can lead because I was the leader of all of it. And then everything changed. It's why you look at things that happen around the world and go, how could people justify doing that under the banner of Christianity? How could people justify saying that and acting that way and treating those people or that group of people and then slap Jesus onto it as if this is God's will for their life or this context of this cultural moment? Like, how could people treat, do, say the things that they're saying under the banner of Christianity? And Paul would go, I know, I did it. That's where this religious system leads. That's where the kingdoms of this world thinking leads when it infiltrates the religious movement. And in fact, Paul knew because he weaponized and he politicized his religion. And he did it with a clear conscience. In fact, this is going to bother some of you, but you can read it for yourself. When Paul became a Jesus follower, he could find nothing. This is so radical about the teachings of Jesus. Nothing in the teaching of Jesus to justify violent opposition to those who violently opposed him. And so Paul, the guy who led the movement, highly educated under Gamaliel, the guy that tried to stamp out Christianity, became a Christian, gave all of the kingdoms of this world ways up, and he embraced the way of the cross, the way of the Jesus movement. And the world would never be the same. Here's how he explained this to a group of people who were very similar to us, progressive in terms of they wanted progress, they wanted success, like get it done, this church in Corinth. And here's what he writes in 1 Corinthians 1:17, Paul's words, the King, Jesus, the King sent me to preach the gospel of good news, but not with wisdom and eloquence or the ways of this world or the systems of this world, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of what? Emptied of what? And Paul's like, this is not rhetoric. This is good news for all people, all men, all women, every single individual on earth. But here's the question, and this is the question they were especially asking. How can the cross have any power? Like the cross literally, especially in their culture, is the symbol of powerlessness. It's the symbol of, bro, you lost. Avoid at all costs. It's over for you. It's rock bottom. I mean, hanging on a tree under what the Romans considered the art of Roman crucifixion, that's not winning anything. There's no power in that. There is powerlessness. It is as bad as it gets. I mean, how can you even put those two words together? And yet Paul would go, there's a reason that I'm drawing this distinction, because that contradiction is the perfect way to highlight we don't like it a lot of times, countercultural, counterintuitive. Nobody's going to help you with this, but this is the way of Jesus, and it's a way that we are daily tempted to avoid and to abandon. Because who lives like this? Who's going to encourage that? Who's going to cheer that on? That it is so unnatural and so counterintuitive, and it's so subtle that we are unaware that we're even tempted to abandon it. So we're claiming to follow and know Jesus and living contradictory to what Jesus said is actually the way in which you follow him. Here's a real practical application. What is crazy to me is that there are whole segments, massive, large segments of Christianity that I feel like have grown, and some statistics will tell you this, that openly and apologetically resist the way of Jesus as too weak and too passive. It just doesn't work. And we love Jesus and we follow Jesus. We believe he died and rose again. But in terms of following the way of Jesus, we need a little more strength. We need a little more, let's get things done. Let's change stuff. Let's whatever. Let's make sure we get ours. Make sure that we protect and defend. Like the way of Jesus, and unapologetically, they would just say, it's too weak and it's too passive, but we love Jesus. And here's what I'll hear over and over and over again. It won't work. It won't work. I mean, let's just be practical. Let's love Jesus, but the way of Jesus, that won't work. It did it did work. And 2,000 years later, it's why we're here. It's why we're worshiping. It's why by 300 AD, the Roman Empire was toppled without raising a sword or without assembling an army. Because Jesus and his way became the symbol, this cross of this countercultural, counterintuitive message of Jesus that he was inviting everybody to follow. And it is historically undeniable that that way changed everything. And so Jesus is inviting us and he says, listen, this isn't primarily just a way of believing. That's part of it. I'm talking about a way of living. And I'm telling you, in 2024, it's as countercultural as it was when Jesus launched it. It is so non-intuitive. It is so other. It is so, nobody's going to cheer you on with this. And Jesus says, this is what I'm inviting you into. And it's why he insisted these uncomfortable words that we love to edit out in Luke 9:23. Whoever wants to be my what? Yeah, I told you, it's a very uncomfortable verse. We don't even like to recite it. Whoever wants to be my what? My disciple, my follower. Whoever wants to actually follow me. Not believe in me, not heaven when you die, pray to prayer. Whoever wants to follow me must deny themselves. You first, me second. My way second, I'm submitting to you. I think I deserve it, but I'm not going to try to cling to it at all costs. Must deny themselves and take up their cross that eventually would become the symbol of everything that Jesus represented that is still so uncomfortable to us daily. And follow me. Because Jesus would say every single day, you are tempted by and you are baited into submitting your life to the kingdoms of this world. Because they just feel like they work. They just feel like they're more realistic. It just feels better. It feels like a better way. It feels like a more relevant way. But every single day you're going to be tempted. And Jesus says, I'm inviting you into living your life in a different direction. And make no mistake, it will be as countercultural today as it was when Jesus launched it. It'll put you in the minority, even among the Jesus movement. But Jesus would go, I want you to be my disciple, but you got to deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. Oh, see, here's how I wanted to get us started. I want to ask you a question, and I say this often. I'm not asking you to do anything yet, and there's a reason I do that. It sounds a little bit weird, but I understand that there are certain topics that emotionally take time. And some of you, I hope you get there, but a lot of us are not there yet. It's just like, I think maybe you read those verses wrong. So I don't want you to act, it's too early, it's too raw, I got to think about this. And here's the other thing I want to encourage you with this question I'm about to ask you to take with you this week. This is for you personally. Because people love to read in so many different layers to what's said. And so your mind, depending on what you filter your faith through, goes 100 different directions. So I just want to say this, because if I don't qualify, you won't ever ask the question. I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about all the things within, your context. I'm not talking about the future of the country. I'm not talking about global economy. And I'm not saying that you should go back into a toxic relationship or stay in a toxic relationship. So let me take all of the extremes off the table, because if I don't, you'll answer the question in a way that has nothing to do with you. So I'm talking about you personally. This week, and I'm admitting it's uncomfortable. So just, for some of you, this is your first week, and your last week, it's been a great run. This week, in that conflict, in that disagreement, in that back and forth conversation, and you feel like you have the leverage and you should have the leverage, and you've been kind of going back and forth about this for a while, or they bother you so much, or in that thing, and every time you walk in, there's so much tension. In that disagreement, that conflict, and that back and forth at work, at home, at school, I want you to just don't do anything. I just want you to consider this question. What would choosing to lose look like in this situation? What would willfully choosing to lose look like in this situation? What would it look like to let the other person win? And before you think that somehow I'm disconnected from the rest of the humanity, I feel this as much as you do. I want to win. I want to achieve. I think I'm always right. But what would it look like to let them take the credit even though it's your credit? What would it look like to let them go first even when you got there first? And here's a tip, because I think it's so important for a lot of us. There is a big, big, big difference between losing and choosing to lose. Choosing to lose, as countercultural and counterintuitive as it is not weakness. In fact, I don't know if you remember and miss it from earlier in the message, you serve a man who gave up everything willfully on a cross when he did not have to. Losing and choosing to lose does not make you weak. It makes you more like your Savior. It positions you under the rhythm of the power of the Spirit of God to do something way beyond what you could ever imagine. Here's why I know this is not weakness, because I've watched this in the lives of other people. And Paul would actually describe it this way. To be able to do this, it is unnatural. And it is beyond your normal capacity, and it will require power. In fact, this is a lot of the problem with Christianity in our culture. It's all about what I feel like is natural and what I can accomplish with my own will and own pursuits, and we're so good at accomplishing things, we think we can do it on our own, and then Jesus invites us into something that is way over our head to go, if you're gonna do this, you're gonna need some power outside of you. And Paul would say it this way, to be able to live this way, it's gonna require supernatural resurrection power. The only way you can do this is because we're on the other side of the resurrection. And the New Testament says this, that the same power that raised Christ from the dead, you tracking with this, is now living inside of you. And so I get to be in the most humble way possible and dwelt by the Spirit of God, because it never comes with arrogance, the most power in the room. Because I can walk away. I can deny myself. I can lose. We have that potential as followers of Jesus and followers of this new way, but you cannot do it on your own. And when you see this happen, come on, isn't it true? It is so unnatural and so uncharacteristic. It is powerful. And I gotta close, but I'll just make this case. If we saw this in large segments of Christianity or the way of Jesus in our neighborhoods, in our culture, in our country, it would change it overnight. What is so weak, what is so passive, would turn the world upside down like it did once upon a time. So this week, in that conflict, that back and forth, what would choosing to lose look like in this situation? I don't know the context of your life, but a good place to start might be the middle school car line tomorrow. Because Satan's all over that. Would you guys pray with me? Jesus, thank you so much for what you're doing in this moment. I get all the angst around this. I feel all of it. I felt all of it as I've prepared this. As I constantly am reconfronted with the words and the way of Jesus, it is as comfortable as it has ever been for me. And yet it is your way. And so I just pray for some of us who are clinging to a way that seems like it works in our life or in our culture, but actually is emptying us of power, that you would lovingly confront us. And I pray for those of us who are uncomfortable right now, and I get it. Help us just to remember that uncomfortable is the breeding ground for where you want to work, because comfort is comfortable, but it's not always healthy. And in that discomfort is many times where the Spirit of God wants to do something. It's going to change our thinking and change the way we live and ultimately change the trajectory and the course of our life. And I'm praying even bigger for our church, for multitudes of people to take up the actual way of Jesus, not what they see in culture, not what is even celebrated many times in the church, but the way of Jesus, that we would live differently, that we would capture the attention of our community, our neighbors, our family, and that we would take up our cross, deny ourselves, and follow you. We pray this in Jesus' incredible name.